You are listening to the fourth part of our 12-part series, Healthy Heart, the Wise Woman Way, with Susan Wade at Time Monk Radio. Hello, Susan. Welcome back to Time Monk Radio.
Hi, Gemini. Here we are at the last show of this month. We've been looking at the basics of having a healthy heart, the Wise Woman Way. If you're just joining us, go back and catch the first week when we looked at the basics of a healthy heart and some wonderful foods that are just so good for the heart and really tasty too. Avocados, pomegranates, nuts, olive oil, chocolate. You can't say a heart-healthy diet is a mean diet. It is a delicious diet. And then you'll want to listen to the second week where we talked about having healthy blood vessels and why it's so important to have a healthy circulatory system and what kind of lifestyle and herbal additions can help us do that. We focused on ginkgo, kelp, and pomegranate. And then last week, we talked about the heart as a muscle, and we started looking at some tonics to the muscles, including comfrey, motherwort, and hawthorn. Motherwort and hawthorn being two of my all-time favorite cardiovascular tonics. As a matter of fact, we could very easily talk about hawthorn and motherwort on every single one of these shows. These are two of the most important herbs for heart health for anyone who wants to maintain a healthy heart, like myself, and that's why I take hawthorn on a daily basis and motherwort on a fairly regular basis, or for someone who has heart problems, my sweetheart, who takes twice as much motherwort and 3 times as much hawthorn as I do, and whose cardiologist says, for a man with the problems you got an amazingly healthy heart. And one of the problems that he doesn't have, and one of the problems that I don't have, and we're glad not to have it, is a problem with blood pressure. However, a great many people do have problems with blood pressure. And one of the reasons that a great many people have problems with blood pressure is that the definition of what healthy blood pressure is has changed. It used to be that the upper number of your blood pressure was said to be healthy if it was your age plus 100. So at my age, which is 68, my upper number could be 168. Now, if I had an upper number of 168 now, I would have high blood pressure, and high blood pressure in the second stage. The doctors would be jumping and moving, and they would be very freaked out by that. Nowadays, everyone, no matter what age, is considered to have a healthy blood pressure if the blood pressure is no more than 120 over 80. And I'm going to kind of circle back around, and I'm going to tell you what these numbers mean and why one is always larger than the other. Pre-hypertension, in other words, you're kind of getting up there, but it's not really high blood pressure yet, would be readings of 120 to 139 over 80 over 89. So reading of 138 over 88 would not be a healthy blood pressure, but it wouldn't yet qualify as hypertension. Now, the movement in the medical establishment has been more and more to treat this level of rising blood pressure because it is thought that everyone benefits from keeping their blood pressure in a normal range. We don't want it to be too low. Too low can also cause problems. Very high blood pressure, which requires emergency care, would be a blood pressure exceeding 180 over 110. And of course, if we're looking at a blood pressure between 140 to 159 over 99, 90 to 99, then we are looking at the beginning stages of high blood pressure. Blood pressure is called the silent killer because it has virtually no symptoms. Very low blood pressure can cause dizziness, fainting, thirst, trouble concentrating, blurry vision, nausea, clammy skin, shallow breathing, exhaustion, and depression. But high blood pressure causes at the worst headaches, anxiety, nosebleed, shortness of breath, not the kind of symptoms that we're going to sit up and take notice about. In fact, most people with high blood pressure don't have any symptoms, not even a headache or a pounding in their ears. Blood pressure is measured, as we all know, by inflating a cuff. And most of us think of that cuff as going around the upper arm, but you can also put a cuff around the wrist or the leg. And one of the newer things that we're doing is to measure blood pressure both in a leg and in the upper arm and comparing those readings. And very thorough MDs will measure the blood pressure in the left arm, the left leg, and the right leg, and compare all four of those readings. Taking a single blood pressure reading is kind of like a little snapshot. It just tells us what's happening right then. And, of course, blood pressure is supposed to change throughout the day. So we can't just say that is my blood pressure. As a matter of fact, what I encourage people to do, if you'd like homework for this week, is to go out to a drugstore and buy a blood pressure cuff, one of those little ones that you can put on your wrist. You don't wear it around all the time. You just take it out, strap it on, it pumps up, it gives you a reading of your blood pressure. And what I like to have students who are working to make their heart healthier and to lower their blood pressure do is to just use that cuff. Put it on when you wake up in the morning. Put it on after you have your first cup of coffee. Put it on after you've had an orgasm. Put it on after you've had a fight. Put it on when you're in a stressful situation. Put it on when you're sitting and watching TV. Put it on before you eat, after you eat. Measure your blood pressure. Really use that cuff a lot when you first get it, and start to get a sense of how your blood pressure varies. That it's not going to be the same reading all of the time. What's your lowest blood pressure reading that you get in a 24-hour period? What's your highest blood pressure reading? When I did this, one of the first things that became really obvious to me was the less sleep I got, the higher my blood pressure was in the morning. There's probably nothing else that has motivated me to get more Z's than to see what a strong effect not getting enough sleep has on my blood pressure, which to me means not just my blood pressure, but how hard my heart is working. Now that I'm laughing before I go to sleep and getting deeper sleep and more of it, my blood pressure is much lower in the morning. Now I've had people say, well, you can't trust those cups that you buy at the drugstore. They're not accurate. And it's true that they're not accurate, but we're not looking for that kind of accuracy. What we're looking for is something that can tell you the difference between this event and that event, how you feel now and how you feel then. And so long as you're using the same cuff all the time, that inaccuracy is going to be the same inaccuracy the entire time. And so it will get you the results that you want. Each contraction of the heart creates a wave of pressure that passes through all the arteries in the body, and that wave of pressure is what we measure as blood pressure. Blood pressure changes constantly and instantly depending on thoughts, feelings, and actions. And blood pressure, irrespective of what's going on with us in our bodies or our lives, also has its own daily cycle. Blood pressure usually peaks at midday and usually hits a low just before we wake up from our night's rest. So, blood pressure is the amount of resistance to the passage of blood that the blood vessels offer. This is pretty clear. More flexible arteries and veins allow the blood to flow easily, and thus blood pressure is low. When cholesterol, plaque, or calcium particles or even sticky blood cells get involved, then the blood does not flow easily, and blood pressure rises. When we are tense, rigid, constricted, and frightened, our blood vessels become tense, rigid, constricted, and frightened too, and blood pressure rises. Blood pressure is not, however, just a function of the stiffness or flexibility of the blood vessels. special hormones which are produced by the kidneys, the thyroid, the adrenals, the nervous system, the brain, and the immune system work together to raise and lower blood pressure according to the circumstances we find ourselves in. If you relax and listen, your blood pressure will go down. If you engage and speak or feel strongly, your blood pressure will rise. Get a cuff and test it out. Sit quietly for 5 minutes and take your blood pressure, what you're reading. Get up, pace around the room, give a political speech, conduct an orchestra, really get yourself going. Sit down and take your blood pressure. Is it different? See for yourself that you have the ability to change your blood pressure, that it's not this one reading you get at the doctor's office and it's that all the time, but that moment to moment, day by day, you have a real control over your blood pressure. High blood pressure causes wear and tear and stress throughout the entire cardiovascular system. The risk of stroke and heart attack goes up as blood pressure goes up. If the blood pressure remains too high or too low for an extended period, then you can actually have kidney failure or heart failure. Think about it. Some of the blood vessels in the kidneys are very, very tiny. And when blood pressure goes up and up, those tiny little blood vessels actually rupture. And the kidneys are then not able to work as well. The kidneys not working as well means that the signals about blood pressure aren't being produced or interpreted correctly, and so the blood pressure goes up. And once again, we get into a decreasing health spiral there as the function of the kidneys is harmed by high blood pressure. Then high blood pressure becomes more likely because the kidneys aren't able to counter it. High blood pressure can also cause blood vessel damage that may result in dementia, vision loss, aneurysms, and sexual problems. So there's a lot going on with blood pressure. We can see why the medical establishment is so eager to look at your blood pressure. It's one of the standard things that happens. Even went to a dentist now who measured your blood pressure before doing dental work. Very easy, painless, non-invasive to measure blood pressure, and something that really can be changed. After, and it wasn't just my blood pressure she measured, it was many people's blood pressure, and she then changed the music in her office because she began to notice that when different music was playing, she got different blood pressure readings. As a matter of fact, the second time I went, she insisted that the sound in the office be turned off when blood pressure readings were being taken because she found the sound influenced blood pressure so strongly. Again, these are the kinds of things that you can check out if you have your own little cuff, which is fairly inexpensive. What kind of music do you usually listen to? How does your blood pressure respond to that music? If you listen to different music, would your blood pressure be different? Now, we've talked about some of the herbs that are useful in lowering blood pressure, and we talked about them in some detail. Hawthorn and motherwort are wonderful picks for lowering blood pressure, but I had a third one, and that is Passionflower, Passiflora incarnata. And Passionflower is kind of my ace in the hole, shall we say. If someone says I have high blood pressure and I want to work with an herb to bring it down, I will usually suggest motherwort. Motherwort definitely lowers blood pressure. It does it quickly, and it eases anxiety. A dose is a dropper full of the tincture of the fresh flowering plant, and I have had medical professionals who called me up after taking a dropper full twice a day for 6 weeks to say, my blood pressure is completely normal. Drugs couldn't work this fast. and I feel so good as well. As a matter of fact, motherwort relieves anxiety and counters the effects of stress. So we're not just talking about an herb that can help people who have pre-hypertension. We're talking about a plant that can deal with true hypertension, even rather extreme, not emergency, but even rather extreme hypertension, and bring those readings down safely and quickly. Remember, motherwort is in the mint family, and it's just as safe to use as drinking a cup of mint tea. If the person that I'm talking to doesn't seem to be dealing with stress or dealing with anxiety, then I might suggest hawthorn. Or if the person has high blood pressure and some other cardiovascular problem like high cholesterol, then hawthorn would probably be my first pick. But you can't go wrong choosing either motherwort or hawthorn, and they both work pretty much the same way, except remember that hawthorn can be given to people with low blood pressure. Motherwort does reduce blood pressure. It will reduce blood pressure even for people whose blood pressure is too low, but hawthorn will not. So if you're not sure about the blood pressure, hawthorn is a better choice. It's safe for anyone of any age, and the dose of hawthorn is usually 2 to 4 dropperfuls of tincture taken daily until the blood pressure is back to normal, and then a maintenance of about 1 dropperful on a daily basis. You can take as much as you want. Passionflower, as I said, is the one that I reserve. If someone calls me up after 6 weeks and says, well, I've been taking my motherwort or my hawthorn regularly and I'm not getting the drop in blood pressure that I want, then I say, add some passionflower or switch to passionflower. I had not thought of passionflower very much as a heart tonic until one of my students talked to me about her C-reactive protein, and we will talk more about C-reactive protein later on as we talk, and her need to lower the inflammation in her body. And we talked about a variety of different things that she could use. And she finally settled on linden. And linden was a great herb for her. But as we were looking through various herbs, passionflower kind of popped up into my mind. And sure enough, as life will often bring us around to these things, within the next month, I met a woman who was a great fan of passionflower. And she said to her, it was the very best herb to recommend to anyone who had high blood pressure. Well, I came home and started experimenting with it. As I said, my blood pressure isn't high, but I know, because of working with my blood pressure cuff, which things can raise my blood pressure. And so I would take some passionflower, and then I would do one of those things that would raise my blood pressure, and I couldn't raise it. The passionflower would act as a block to prevent my blood pressure from going up. It was quite amazing. And so those who are working to lower their blood pressure with herbs and find after 6 weeks that motherwort hasn't worked as well as they want, or hawthorn hasn't worked as well as they want, can add passionflower or can go just to passionflower. Similar kind of dose. I used to make my passionflower tincture just from the flowers. After all, it's called passionflower. But this woman that I was talking to, who lives in Tucson, makes her passionflower tincture from all of the above ground parts of the passionflower, the vine, the leaves, and the flowers. She had so much wonderful things to say about passionflower, and we don't have time to go into most of them here on this week of our course together, because we have more things that we need to talk about. We need to talk about the connection between blood pressure and the kidneys. Now remember, later on, we're going to have a whole show where we look at how the kidneys influence the health of the heart. And primarily the way they influence that is through their ability to control blood pressure. The blood pressure drugs that are first tried in most situations with an MD are diuretic drugs. In other words, drugs that remove fluid from the body, drugs that are going to influence or affect the kidneys. When there's less blood in the blood vessels, then the same amount of pump from the heart can move that blood more easily. This is the thinking behind using diuretic drugs which remove fluid to lower blood pressure. Now, it's not as easy as just saying diuretic drugs because, in fact, there are different kinds of diuretic drugs that are used to lower blood pressure. Thiazide diuretics and loop diuretics are classic diuretics, and they leach potassium out of the body. Now, potassium is an important mineral for muscle function. What did we learn last week? And the week before, we learned that the heart is a muscle. So when we take a diuretic, a thiazide diuretic or a loop diuretic, which lowers and removes potassium from the body, then we are actually setting ourselves up to have a muscle spasm, which is also called a heart attack, even though we're lowering blood pressure, which should counter stroke and heart attack. On the other side, there are potassium-sparing diuretics, because this is a problem, and the medical establishment certainly knows that it's a problem. The potassium-sparing diuretics include spironolactone and triamterene drugs. However, they cause so much calcium to build up in the blood that heart rhythms can become erratic and, you got it, lead to a heart attack. ACE inhibitors, which are another class of drugs, not a diuretic, used to lower blood pressure, also raise the potassium levels of the blood. So we have drugs that are used to reduce blood pressure, and that should be a healthy thing, but these drugs change the levels of potassium in the body, either lowering it to such an extent that it can cause a muscle spasm, or raising it to such an extent that the heart rhythm becomes erratic. Obviously, not ideal at either end. Diuretics and ACE inhibitors are not the only drugs used to deal with blood pressure. Calcium channel blockers are also prescribed to lower blood pressure. At this point, there is no set standard for what drugs to use. And most doctors have their own favorites. What is usually considered the best way to go is to try a diuretic first. They are considered the safest, but the experts argue that ACE inhibitors and calcium channel blockers are more effective, even though they have more side effects, and so they should be used first. And there is a growing group of doctors with some pretty good research results behind them who are saying that it's not fair to give someone with high blood pressure just one drug or just one type of drug, because these different types of drugs actually work better together. And it's better to start people out on 2 or even 3 drugs for lowering blood pressure. Wow. As someone who uses one herb at a time, I've got to say that I understand why they're saying this, and I've read the studies, and it is certainly true that people who are given combination drug therapies to lower their blood pressure do have better results in terms of blood pressure than people who are just given one type of drug to lower their blood pressure. What I want to see is what's the long-term results for these people. Do they actually live longer? Do they actually have fewer heart attacks? Do they actually have fewer strokes? After all, that's why we're lowering the blood pressure. It's not an end in and of itself. It's something we're doing to create more health. And if we're doing that but we're not creating more health, then I'm not so sure if it's really worth doing. Hawthorn, motherwort, passionflower, we don't need to mix them together. Any one of them will work just fine. But if someone came to me and said they were taking all three, I certainly wouldn't find any problem of any kind with that. In addition to drugs and herbs to lower blood pressure, there are a great number of lifestyle modifications that will lower blood pressure. Meditation, reducing salt, a DASH diet, eliminating smoking, sleeping more, limiting alcohol, losing weight, and exercise. Let's look at what we're talking about here. Any stress-relieving activity, including meditation for as little as 5 minutes a day, will lower that upper number by 20 points. 20 points, that is a huge difference there. That means if you're getting blood pressure readings of 130 in the doctor's office, then meditating, doing Tai Chi, doing yoga, doing Qigong, walking outdoors, swinging on a swing, anything that relieves your stress can, within a month, bring that down to 110. That's a big movement. Drugs are not going to make that much of a change. Reduce the amount of salt in your diet. Up to 75% of the salt in the American diet comes from processed foods and foods eaten in restaurants. We already talked about that last week when we were talking about the trans fatty acids, and the week before that, didn't we? That's been one of our homework assignments, is to get these trans fatty acids out of our diets, and that's going to mean less processed food and less eating out. That makes it really easy, in fact, to reduce salt. Many people say, well, I'm going to reduce salt by not putting salt on my food, but that's not where the salt is coming from. I say to people, if you eat out no more than once a week, and you eat little or no processed food, then you can have the salt shaker on the table and you can put all the salt you want on your food. When we put salt on our food, we taste that salt, and that tastes good to us. When the salt is added to the processed food, we don't actually taste that salt. You know how this got started? Back when canning was not just a home activity, but you could start going to stores and buying canned goods. The temperatures and the processes by which they canned those goods caused a small amount of leaching of the metals of the can into the food and made the food taste bitter. And what they found was that by adding salt to the food, that they could counteract that bitterness. And so it became the norm that foods in cans became foods that were very high in salt. And it's pretty much true today. Even things that say that they're lower in salt are not low in salt. Even things healthy and organic, like a can of organic beans, can be very high in salt. We suggest you rinse them. The DASH diet is a diet that has more fruits and vegetables and less meat than your ordinary American diet. And if you go to the National Institutes of Health and start looking for DASH diet, you can find lots of information about that. Smoking promotes the buildup of fatty deposits inside the arteries, so don't do it. Sleeping more, I already told you my experience and how sleeping more definitely affected my blood pressure. And for every extra hour that you spend in bed, you can bring that top number down by 5 points. Alcohol is kind of a mixed bag. For women, no alcohol at all. For men, 1 drink a day or less. Lose weight, maybe, maybe not. It doesn't have that much effect on blood pressure. And we're finding that older adults who are a little fatter are actually much more likely to live a long and healthy life. And exercise, well, exercise by itself is not going to reduce your blood pressure. But we already talked about how valuable exercise is for the cardiovascular system. Once again, our time is gone. What a delight and a thrill to be with you all. Come and visit me at SusanWeed.com. Find my books at thewisewomanbookshop.com, and check out the Wise Woman University and my course, A Healthy Heart, the Wise Woman Way. Good night and green blessings, Gemini, and everybody at Time Monk Radio, and all you listeners too.
Thank you, Susan. This concludes the fourth part of our 12-part series, Healthy Heart, the Wise Woman Way with Susan Weed at Time Monk Radio.